Why is Russia getting their shit pushed in Ukraine? We're going to take a look at that and see what's going on there. That's a big discussion that everybody's having right now. Everybody's got their opinions. We're going to take a look. The one interesting thing about war is that it exposes everything. It exposes any shortcomings that you have and any strengths that you have. So it's really showing a lot everywhere. But let's take a look at this and see what's going on. Let's start by discussing how difficult it is to get accurate information living in the age of information, especially getting good information coming from an area such as a war zone. Let's go ahead and just say one of the main problems and one of the biggest problems we all understand. It's pretty common. It's propaganda. We're seeing propaganda from Ukraine. We're seeing propaganda from Russia. We're also seeing EU and NATO with their own propaganda. We're seeing US and Chinese propaganda going in overtime. It's really very interesting to see. Propaganda is a tactic that people use in wartime. So it's a tactic that's studied and discussed just as much as any other military tactic because it's very effective. If you can win over the hearts and minds of the people and the troops, if you can lower their morale, that's huge. Very huge. So let's go ahead and just go clear that out the way. We know there's propaganda. We're just trying to figure out truthfully what's going on and who's closest with what they're saying. Miscalculations could be considered the theme of 2022. I think a lot of things are going to come to roost this year for a lot of people worldwide. But let's go ahead and start with the corporate media experts that they've been dragging up for the past few weeks. I'm going to go ahead and say the amount of Ukraine-Russia experts that have come out the woodwork the past few weeks has been absolutely pathetic. But I'm kind of right now focusing on the corporate media experts that they're putting up on a pedestal and you see on your TV all the time. The same experts that said Putin would not be invading are now the same experts that are explaining what's going to happen as he invades and they're explaining tactics on a map. It's just the most pathetic thing I've seen. As bad and as warmongering as the corporate media has proven yet again to be, by far the biggest miscalculation is from Vladimir Putin. This dude thought that he was going to be greeted as a liberator or something. I'm not sure. He must have been drinking the Kool-Aid too. Because he wasn't the only person before the invasion of Ukraine began that I heard or that thought that Eastern Ukraine is very much heavily pro-Russia and that they'll have no problems in Eastern Ukraine. It's the western part of Ukraine that's more aligned with the EU. Nope, that just has not turned out to be true. Russia has started to go into Ukraine and they've been meeting stiff resistance by the Ukraine forces everywhere they're going in. Up north, the way the ground's thawed out and all the mud up there, it's just forced them to roads. They can't control the countryside. They basically have to stay on the roads and they're just getting drilled and hammered by the Ukraine forces, getting ambushed, and then they take the same roads again. It's getting so bad that the Ukraine forces are taking cameras out because they know where the Russians are going to come, and they're just videotaping themselves shooting down Russian helicopters and planes and blowing up armor. It's amazing just how poorly the Russian military and the Russian leadership has miscalculated this invasion. Another major miscalculation by Putin was his underestimation of NATO. I'm not sure if he was thinking that NATO was going to be as unified as they turned out to be. All the NATO countries, not only just NATO, but pretty much every country in the world, except for what, 4 or 5, are totally against the invasion of Ukraine. So I do think that he thought there was going to be more divisive actions than what there actually is, but it turns out NATO and the world is pretty much united against him. So another major miscalculation by Putin. Something else I've been reading in comments, or even I hear some people that covering militaries and military's technology that do this stuff, you'll hear them say on videos that they think that Russia is sending in their B team. Well, I'm not buying that Russia is sending in their B team. Russia is moving in their army. When it's time the bombs start dropping, you go with what works. So Russia is sending in what works. They had a troop buildup for a long time around the border. And they moved in position the units they wanted to move into position. Also, With all the research I've done ever about militaries and military technologies, the air crews are among the top trained, if not the best trained military units in any military around the world. So don't tell me that these air forces are B team. They're not. And they didn't even know to turn off their transponders, and I'm hoping they at least got the message to turn off your transponders when you're flying missions into enemy territory. But again, this is among your top training. They don't even know to turn off their transponders. They can't scramble their signal. Also, Spetsnaz, they've been getting their shit pushed in when they get pair dropped into somewhere. They are getting absolutely pushed right out. So if your special forces and your air forces are your B crew being sent in, I think it's probably about time you send in your normal A crew, your military. Get them in. Let them get blown up too. Okay, let's say the B team argument is correct, or I don't think it is, but let's just say it is for the sake of argument. It still, to me, makes very little sense and it's very poor, militarily speaking. Let's just take a look at the map of Ukraine. This place is massive. I don't know why you would take your conscript forces, your forces that just don't have a lot of training, and throw them against soldiers you know that have been fighting for 8 years now over in the Donbass region. Ukraine's been fighting in that part of the world for a while now. This is not new to them. So I don't know why you would send untrained green forces in just to get slaughtered like that. That seems very cruel to me and just a waste of military power. It seems to me what would make more sense is you to take your military that you trained and you equipped, push them forward, secure areas. Once those areas have been taken by your military and secured, then you're ready to push those forward again. That area needs to be filled with more troops. Then you bring your conscripts in, your National Guard type troops, less trained troops, and you have those secure the area. You have them police, you keep any type of guerrilla activities down, have them enforce your will. This really helps you out by protecting your supply lines. This way you're not having your supply lines get hammered and your troops that are pushing forward can get the supplies that they need and continue to press onward with their missions. Just doesn't make a lot of sense to me just to throw troops away. It seems very cruel and very stupid. Logistics seems to be the most obvious problem so far, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. As you know by now, Russia has had problems getting gas, bullets, and food to their spearheading troops. It's been a major problem for them. And they haven't learned either. Just still haven't gotten it yet. And we're over 2 weeks into this. A good example is there's a city called Sumy in the east of Ukraine. It's a heavily fortified position by the Ukraine forces, and it's been contested about the whole time. Well, the other day they went out and they hit a Russian convoy and destroyed a bunch of trucks. And some of the pictures they've shown were of gas trucks they've destroyed recently in that area with other convoys. And these fuel trucks aren't even armored. Russia hasn't even bothered to throw extra armor, any kind of armor, on these convoy trucks, and they are just absolutely getting wrecked. And it's a major problem for them, and it is a problem that other people have pointed to that might be an issue for the Russian forces. And not only were they correct on that, they were very, very, very correct on that, and it doesn't seem that that issue is going to get resolved anytime soon, so expect for that to continue to be a problem for Russian forces. All right, I'm not trying to call anyone out online. If I use an example, I'm going to try to use examples of people that I like, resources that I like online, one of which is Binkov's Battlegrounds here. Just because I'm subscribed to a channel doesn't mean I agree with everything that channel says. Of course, there's things that Binkov's covered that I disagree with, and I don't always agree 100% with his evaluation of forces and stuff. But it's a great source. He's got good information and he's worth checking out. So check him out if you haven't. But we're going to talk a little bit about what some people were saying before the war. Here's the thing. In Bikov's video, he was correct. I think he was a little hesitant in what he was saying about the logistics of Russia, but he was 100% correct, more correct than he knew how correct he was. Alright, so here's a video from 5 months back, just how well trained is the Russian army. and you see pretty darn well. I disagree with this. I don't think that's accurate. But let's take a little look at some other things.
Looking at the composition of Russian ground forces, it's apparent that Russia has fewer logistics and support units than the US. For the size of its combat component, that is. It's something Russia is aware of, as there are plans to add more logistics units on the divisional level.
All right, and let's start with looking at this right here. You got one of the top comments is, it turns out that Russian logistics is in fact not up to it. Yep, and it seems like everybody pretty much is agreeing with that. You gotta love the internet. You could get some truth. We have discussed two symptoms: miscalculations and poor logistics. Those are symptoms of a larger problem. We're going to now discuss what I think is one of the main root causes of the Russian military's troubles. Corruption infects every government and every government entity in some fashion or another. It depends on how strong the corruption is. Let me quickly just sum up my international business class in college. There are some countries that are okay with corruption, and if you want to do business in those countries, you have to pay the correct officials, you have to buy the right licensing, you have to know what you're doing, and that's just a cost of business in some countries. You got to pay the bribes. Then you have countries out there that are not corrupt, or not very corrupt. They're all corrupt, but they actually try to weed out corruption. They have laws on the books, and they actively prosecute people found with doing corruption. And the society doesn't like corrupt politicians or corrupt businesses. And they vary all across the world depending on where you're at. So anytime you are evaluating a military, in my opinion, you must take how corrupt the country is into consideration, because you got to understand, these are the guys with the guns. If there is corruption, it's going to be in a government agency, and it's definitely going to be with the ones that have the guns. So let's take a little look here. We see at the top of the list, we got, Denmark and New Zealand for not being corrupt. That's pretty good, pretty good. But let's take a look at where Russia sits. Ooh. Rank 129. Score 30 out of 100. 129th out of 180 countries. It's gone up since 2019, but it's just always been not that good. So you can talk about corruption and how bad it is, but again, war exposes so much, and it's just exposing the corruption inside of the Russian military. And this is a huge problem that it's just not on a military level that they can counteract it. This is a societal thing. This is just how the people are in the country. And that has to be addressed as a whole. The nation has to deal with that. It can't be just something that the military is dealing with, or it won't correct it. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is how corruption affects things like equipment. So I have a photo here of just normal Russian troops. When I'm looking at militaries, I look at just what the typical normal troop would be issued, because that's what I would be, a regular army soldier. So this is what I kind of look at, and here's a good example of just how corruption has not allowed much progress in the Russian military. Look at these helmets for one. Those are not modern helmets. I'm sure they have plenty of good uses. They can carry water, they can help you dig a foxhole. I'm sure they have many good uses. Stopping a bullet from a sniper or from someone with a rifle isn't one of those uses. An example, let's take a look at this. And here you go. These are just entry-level basic ballistic helmets. And I mean, you can see them starting off for as low as $130, 99 bucks. They're ranging upwards to 500. But these are kind of what you have for entry level. There are ballistic helmets that are much more expensive than this. So this is a problem to me. Even like U.S. soldiers, when they go to battle, they are issued good helmets out in the field, given good helmets. Unlike these Russian soldiers that we see, that their helmets are going to stop around. You always hear the people say, well, can American citizens stop the U.S. government? Yada, yada, yada. It's like, look, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not here to have that fight, but I will say for certain, because I know I've set plenty kits up and sold plenty kits for people. U.S. citizens have better kits than the majority of the Russian army, if this is how the Russian army is set up. Without a question, American civilians have better kits. We have night vision, we have thermal, it's expensive, but we have it. We're not seeing a whole lot of night vision and thermal being used over there. You would expect for Russia to have an advantage at night. It doesn't look like Russia is moving at night either. So just a lot of problems with gear, but that's just getting started. Another example of how corruption is affecting the Russian army advance in Ukraine is just by looking at the truck and tire situation, and you see it really well up north in Ukraine. So Russia's having problems just leaving the road. They don't have the correct equipment to do that. The ground's not right, which is why you're constantly seeing them on these roads. You're seeing these large convoys stuck in one spot, sitting. I know most of you know about that large convoy sitting outside of northwest Kiev that's been there for a long time, like the 40-mile convoy. You know, there's a lot of examples of this going around, and that's because the ground up north is really muddy. The Russian tanks and heavier equipment just sink right in when they go, but even the trucks and lighter stuff up there, their tires aren't great for it. And I don't want to get to a whole debate about tires. You know, I'm from the South. I've been out in mudding a lot, so you know you got to have good tires. If not, you got to know the right people to come pull you out of mud if you get stuck. But tires do make a difference, and this is where you see basically Russia getting cheap tires. And you know, anytime you're dealing with military and stuff like that, contracts, you're going to always have price come into effect. That's just reality. There's a lot of stuff that a lot of militaries have done that I wouldn't do, but I realize they do it because they do have a budget. So you see that here with Russia buying cheap tires, and you're seeing their walls blow out, and you're seeing them not being able to go out in the mud, and you think, well, those cheap tires. But there's more to that, because you know we're talking Russia. So exactly how does corruption exacerbate this problem? A tire is like most any other product you want to buy. There's good quality high-end tires, and then there's cheap Chinese quality tires, and there's quality in between. Depending on your budget, your task and purpose is going to determine the tire that you want to acquire. However, that doesn't matter. We're going to put that aside. As far as maintenance goes, they're generally the same. We'll use a truck as an example. You can't put tires on a truck and then just set it outside and leave it sitting for long periods of time. What'll happen is the air will run out of the tires, and it'll go flat, and the tire wall will start to deteriorate, and if you let it sit long enough, the tire will literally just rot and be a mess. So the way you combat that is through basic maintenance. You just go outside and start the truck up, put some gas in it, and drive it around. This accomplishes two key goals. The first goal is to assure that the engine is turning over, fluids are being distributed through the truck, the tires are turning over, and everything's working as it should. If there are any problems, simple, no problem at all. You just put it in a repair bay, fix it, and you're good to go. The other key thing that this helps to accomplish is prolonging the life of your mechanical equipment. If it's mechanical equipment, you need to use it or it's just going to rot away, especially if you're leaving it sitting outside. This is where corruption comes into play. So when a government issues their spending, part of their spending is for defense departments, defensive spending. So when the defensive departments get their monies, they target a certain percentage of those monies for maintenance, maintaining their equipment. I know you might be shocked by this, but not every dollar is spent in an efficient manner. Sometimes dollars are wasted or pocketed. Well, this is when corruption really starts to bite into your programs, and war really exposes those deficiencies. So what we are noticing is these officers that were issued money for maintenance weren't using all that money for proper maintenance. Either they weren't issued enough money or they weren't using all that money. I think it's probably a combination of both. I don't think they were issued as much, and I think some of it was going in their pockets. I think a lot more of it was going in their pockets than what people thought. Well, What this does is, think about it like this. The corrupt officer gets this money, and instead of exercising all 100 of his trucks, he exercises 90 of his trucks. And 10% of his trucks he just leaves sitting because, who's going to need all those trucks, right? Well, this is where war exposes that. So what's going on is, this is what I'm sure is happening. When Russia was doing their buildup, these officers were going out and getting their trucks ready to put them on trains, and noticing that these truck tires, some of them were flat. And whether they knew or not, what they were doing was just filling them with air and then putting them on trains. Now, they're not loaded down, mind you. They have no extra weight on them. They're just filling the tires with air, putting them on trains, and shipping them to the front lines. They get to the front, they're taken off trains, and then they're parked again. And they sit there until they need to be loaded down with material or personnel, and they're sent into conflict zones. And we're seeing basically improperly maintained equipment like tires just blowing out. These cheap Chinese tires that were not properly maintained, their sidewalls are blowing out. They're not able to go through these muddy terrains because they just lack the quality and the design to do this. They're failing. So these Russian convoys are having to stay on roads, which is why you're seeing these convoys like the 40-mile-long convoy in northwest of Kiev. This is what's just going on in the north. They can't get off the road. We're able to see this because of all the Russian equipment that's been taken by Ukraine forces and by Ukraine farmers that are hooking up to Russian armor and just hauling them off. It's been absolutely pity hillish to watch, but it's been something to watch, which is just amazing. But this is part of the problems that you get when you attack a country that doesn't want to be attacked. The people aren't happy with you being there. We're seeing this gear when it's captured. Now, there are reports that Russian soldiers are tearing up, sabotaging their own gear so that they can just walk away. I haven't seen a whole lot of confirmation with that, and I don't know how much of that is going on and if that's really having a big effect on the logistics. I think mostly what it is it's just not being properly maintained, and they're not spending the money that they could to get all their soldiers proper gear or better gear. They're just pocketing large amounts of that money and just saying, whatever. When evaluating armed forces, another thing I like to look at are the MREs that are issued to the soldiers. A good source that I use for this is Steve 1989 MRE info. He's been around for a long time. You see, he's got a lot of subscribers, a ton of videos, and if you want to learn more about different MREs from around the world and different militaries, what they issue, this is a good source to go to. We'll open them up, and I mean, he's got stuff from like the 40s and 50s and a long time ago. So it's really cool to see how MREs progress and to see how different militaries handle their MREs and where their MREs are at compared to other militaries. To me, morale is huge when you're talking militaries. They're going to fight well for you, and they're going to be focused if they're well fed and happy. And, the old adage, an army marches on the stomach, is very true. Because if they're hungry and starving, they're going to be more focused on getting food and not on the mission at hand. So, to me, MREs is always a big thing. One of the things I've learned on Steve's channel is if you're ever in a conflict area and there's French forces around, you try to make friends with them and trade for their MREs. But, all kidding aside, we're getting reports and videos of captured Russian equipment containing expired MREs. This is a red flag to me. This is a serious problem. We know that they're having logistics problems. They were sending already expired MREs in the build-up to invasion. That's a huge problem, and that just shows corruption. I mean, watching Steve for so long, I'm fully aware that just because an MRE is expired doesn't mean it's no good. It absolutely doesn't mean that. But the quality in which it's assembled and how it's stored also factors in on if the MRE is going to be good and how long it's going to last after its shelf life. Morale is a huge thing. If your troops have good, fresh rations, first off, troops want hot meals. They're like anybody else. If you give them a choice of going to a mess hall and getting a steak and potatoes, they're going to take that over an MRE. But if you're in the field, you got what you got. It's what you got to deal with. And if you have MREs that are in date and are fresh for you and good to go. It's a lot better than if you have stale, nasty MREs. Sure, you can eat them and not die, but you're being fired at. You're in an inhospitable place. People want to take you out. They want to delete you. You need all the motivation you can get, and just getting your soldiers a good meal is key. So we're not seeing that Russian soldiers. As a matter of fact, we're seeing the opposite. We know they're having logistics problems and not getting enough food to their troops, along with gas and ammunition. We see reports and videos of Russian soldiers going into Ukraine towns, robbing their stores, robbing their grocery stores of food, and just throwing them in their APCs and taking off. This is a huge red flag, and this has a lot to do with how corrupt Russia is. Another way corruption has affected the Russian military is basically through nepotism. People related or somehow connected with those powerful, rich people who are controlling everything seem to get leadership positions. And we're just not seeing good training and discipline with the Russian military at all. We're seeing colonels and generals being killed on the battlefield. That is really rare to hear of a general getting killed on the battlefield. But Russia doesn't have descrambling equipment, either that or they're just not using it. So whatever you want to say, they're not scrambling their communications. They're being intercepted. They're not turning off their transponders, as we discussed. So when you have these planes drop paratroopers in, the Ukrainians know exactly where they're dropping them at, and they go delete them. When these troops, these generals are communicating, these soldiers are communicating on the battlefield, they're using smartphones and stuff like that. They're not using decryption devices. That's just insane. But these calls are being picked up. It's like they don't understand what geolocation is, and it's getting them killed. It's just baffling to me how poorly trained this is going. Also, along with reports of Russian soldiers stealing food, there's videos and reports of Russian forces robbing banks and just looting in general. This is not only bad training, this is poor discipline. This is not what a professional army does. This is not how a professional army acts. If you're going to invade a land, you can't go in and win the people over by robbing them blind and stealing everything they have and turning their cities into rubble. That's going to work against you. Any of the citizens that might have not cared or maybe even been on your side, once you steal all their stuff or bomb their house out, they're not going to be on your side anymore. They're going to turn against you. And we're seeing this play out. This is just the wrong people being in positions they shouldn't be in. They're not qualified. They don't have the education. Its training is poor, and that's a lot to do with corruption and just money going into people's pockets instead of proper training. Another problem with corruption is it inhibits your ability to plan for the future and to build programs designed to build for future technology. This is really being exposed in Ukraine and showing a deficit in the Russian army. Binkov kind of covered it, but I don't think he showed enough attention to it. The Russian drone technology is pretty far behind. Let's take a look what he says, and then we'll go from there.
What is increasingly part of the Russian army are drone aircraft. Allegedly, Russia operates some 4,000 drones, though the vast majority of those are tiny ones. Right now, the three most used models are the Forepost family, based on the Israeli Searcher drones, homegrown Eleron 3, and the Zastava, based on Israeli Birdeye 400. Besides Eleron, other homegrown drones are increasingly joining the force. More potent Forepost R has started production.
I don't think many people would argue with me that drones are the future of the military. So to me, Russia is very much lacking in drones, and I think that really puts them behind a lot of modern militaries all over the world. When thinking about drone technology, a few countries come to mind: US, Israel, Turkey. As a matter of fact, if you've recently bought a shotgun or thinking about buying a shotgun, it was probably made in Turkey. Likewise, if you're a Russian troop in Ukraine and you've been bombed recently, it was probably from a drone that was also made in Turkey. So here again is a great example of how wars exposed a huge problem with the Russian army. They are way behind on drones. Drones right now are showing problems with the Russian anti-aircraft. It's given that a lot of issues that a lot of militaries across the world have seen, and I'm sure they're going to be making adjustments in their militaries, and I guess Russia's going to have to as well. But again, corruption did not allow for them to see what everybody else is clearly seeing. All right, moving on from the problem of corruption, because that is just a huge problem that every country has to deal with. There are still a couple of other problems that Russia is dealing with in Ukraine that they can't control on their own. There are other forces set dead against them that are competing to cause problems for the Russian army. First and foremost, the Ukraine army and the Ukraine forces, the people of Ukraine, they have shown outstanding resolve. They've shown a lot of bravery. They've stood up to this bigger army, this better funded military that has invaded their country, and they are fighting tooth and nail. So far, I'm very impressed with these guys. They have done a great job versus the Russian military. The other big problem that Russia has is how unified NATO and the rest of the world is behind Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't need to join NATO. They don't need to join EU. Ukraine can be its own country. The people of Ukraine have proven to me that they are more than willing to lay down their lives to protect the country they love, to protect their friends and family. They have a massive country. They have a lot of support and friends that are willing to trade with them and help them out. They can do just fine on their own. They're trying to grow as a country and work through corruption problems they're having as well. So I think Putin's going to have a problem dealing with all the support that NATO forces and the world forces are sending in. There's a lot of in-laws pouring in. There's a lot of javelins and stingers pouring in. You have Panzerfaust and RPGs coming in. This is all stuff that is designed to defeat Soviet-era equipment and equipment based off Soviet-era equipment. And it is doing a hell of a job doing that. So as long as these Ukrainians who have a great leader, Zelensky is not like some leaders who might fill up a helicopter with U.S. cash and bolt in the middle of the night when things get sketchy. He's actually staying firm in Kiev, even though Russia's trying to surround him, and he's holding strong, and that's his people are rallying around him. That's pretty impressive to see. But we're going to see. It looks like there's been a lull in action for the past couple of days. It does seem like Russia's really fed up with getting their shit pushed in, so they might be trying to consolidate forces, is what it's looking like, and kind of focus on opening up another front on Kiev on the east side, getting that in so they can try to surround Kiev and start working on Kiev. But again, we're going to see how everything goes. Ukraine is doing a great job. I don't think anybody expected this. I admit it, I didn't expect for Ukraine to be this tough, this resilient. They have very much impressed me, and I think they're impressing the world. So, good luck to Ukraine. I hope you can defend your country. Thanks for watching.